Welcome to Calvin's Stories, where a man who built everything refuses to be erased. Enjoy.
My name is Devin Hicks. I'm 53 years old. On the second Saturday in October, I stood in the back of a ballroom at the Tacoma Convention Center and watched my wife accept an award for being married to me. 200 professionals in the Pacific Northwest engineering community sat at round tables with white linen and centerpieces shaped like suspension bridges. Renee held a crystal plaque to her chest and said something about partnership and sacrifice, and the room applauded. I reached over the shoulder of a 24-year-old AV technician, plugged a flash drive into the sound system, and pressed play. What came out of those speakers was Renee's own voice, recorded 14 months earlier, saying words that turned every head in that ballroom toward her face. I watched 200 people hear the truth at the same time. And I watched the woman I'd loved for 26 years open her mouth and find absolutely nothing to say. But that moment didn't start in October. It started 9 years before that night, with a favor I never should have granted. Before I tell you the rest, I need to ask you something. If you've ever had someone smile at you over dinner while quietly dismantling your life behind your back, if you know what it's like to be the last person, to understand a story everyone else has already been told, then this one's going to land. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment if you already feel it. This channel exists for the stories that happen in the spaces between what people show the world and what they do when no one's watching. I tell them because someone should. Now. To understand how I ended up at that podium with a flash drive and 26 years of marriage burning down around me, you have to go back to a drafting table in a rented office on Pacific Avenue, 1997. I built Hicks & Associates with a mechanical pencil and a set of borrowed T-squares. One man, one desk, one room that smelled like carpet glue and coffee. I was 25. I had a structural engineering degree from the University of Washington, and a stubbornness that people either admired or found exhausting. My first real project was a pedestrian bridge for the city of Lakewood. Small. Unremarkable to anyone but me. I drew every line by hand, stayed up for 31 hours finishing the load calculations, and drove the blueprints to the client's office in the rain because FedEx would have added a day. Renee drove with me. She was 24, 7 months pregnant with Brett, and she carried those rolled up blueprints under her coat to keep them dry while I held an umbrella over her head instead. That was the woman I married, the one who would ride through a rainstorm to help me deliver my first set of plans. That mechanical pencil I used on that bridge sat in a ceramic cup on my desk for 28 years. Renee called it our lucky pencil. I believed her. I believed everything she told me for a very long time. The firm grew, slowly, the way real things grow. By year 10, we had 6 employees. By year 15, 11. By year 20, 14 people, a corner office on South Tacoma Way with my name on the glass, and a reputation in the Pacific Northwest construction industry for bridges and municipal infrastructure that held up. I designed the reinforced retaining wall system for the Port of Tacoma expansion. I signed off on structural assessments for 3 elementary schools in Pierce County. My business partner, Craig Osterberg, joined in year 9. Good engineer, better at client dinners than I was. We built something I was proud of. At home, Renee raised our boys. Brett came first, then Landon 3 years later. She handled the household. She handled the social calendar. She handled the version of our life that other people saw. And for a long time, I thought that was partnership. The first crack appeared 9 years before the gala, and I didn't recognize it as a crack. I recognized it as a dip. Revenue dropped 12% in a single quarter. I pulled the numbers apart, blamed the housing slowdown, tightened the budget, and told myself this was cyclical. Renee suggested her brother Kyle could handle some overflow projects. A favor, she said, family helping family. Kyle had a small contracting outfit, nothing fancy, But he knew people, and Renee said it would take pressure off me while the market recovered. I said yes. I was grateful. That gratitude is the part that still sits in my chest like a stone, because I was grateful to the woman who was already stealing from me. I just didn't have the language for it yet. Kyle started taking calls. Kyle started showing up at job sites. Kyle started attending client meetings that I thought were mine, but somehow got rescheduled when I wasn't looking, and the revenue didn't recover. It stabilized, but it stabilized lower. I told myself the market was still soft. Renee told me the market was still soft. And I had no reason to disbelieve either of those explanations, because I was looking at the economy when I should have been looking at my own call logs. Year 3. Henderson Properties stopped returning my calls. Bill Henderson and I had worked together for 6 years. Bridges, parking structures, site assessments, reliable, consistent work. I called his office 4 times. I emailed twice. Nothing. Then I heard through a subcontractor that Henderson had signed with Kyle's firm. Kyle's new firm, I should say. Because somewhere between handling my overflow and attending my client meetings, Kyle had incorporated. I mentioned it to Renee over dinner. She put her hand on mine and said, "Some clients just move on, honey." Her voice was warm. Her eyes were steady. And I believed her, because she was my wife, and I had no framework for the idea that my wife would lie to my face while holding my hand. Year 5 was when the ground shifted under my family. Brett, my eldest, 22 years old and finishing his engineering degree, took a job at Kyle's firm. Not mine. Kyle's. He told me over dinner at the kitchen table, Renee sitting between us, and he said something that landed like a slap, delivered gently. "Mom says you're thinking about winding down." I set my fork down. I looked at Renee. She was cutting her chicken. She didn't look up. I said, "I never told anyone I was winding down." Brett looked confused. He said, "She said you mentioned it a few times." I looked at my wife. She looked at me and smiled and said, "Maybe I misunderstood and changed the subject to Landon's semester abroad." I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I was still living in a world where my wife sometimes got things wrong. Not a world where my wife was deliberately rewriting my life story for my own children. Year 6, and Craig left. Craig Osterberg, my partner for 19 years. He came into my office on a Wednesday morning, sat in the chair across from my desk, and said he was dissolving his share of the partnership. He cited direction differences. I asked him what that meant. He said he thought the firm was contracting and he wanted to pursue other opportunities. I asked if this had anything to do with Kyle. He said no. He couldn't look at me when he said it. That night, Renee brought home a bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir and sat with me on the couch and rubbed my shoulders and told me Craig had always been looking for an exit. She said I was better off without him. She said the firm was mine and always had been. Her phone was on the counter behind us. If I had picked it up, I would have seen the text she'd sent Craig that afternoon. One word. Finally. But I didn't pick up the phone. I drank the wine and leaned into my wife's hands and let her comfort me for the loss she had engineered. That's what the double life looks like from inside. It looks like love. It feels like love. It tastes like a good Pinot Noir on a Wednesday night, while the woman who's destroying your life rubs the knots out of your shoulders. Year 7, and the isolation closed around me like a fist. Landon, my younger son, called to cancel Thanksgiving. He was 21. He said, "Mom told us you've been really difficult to work with lately, Dad. She said it might be better if Brett and I give you some space." I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, and felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It was vertigo. My sons had been given a version of my life that I didn't recognize. In their version, I was burning out. I was pushing people away. I was difficult. In their version, the firm was failing because of me. And the kind thing to do was to step back and let better people carry it forward. Renee had written that story. She'd told it to my children, and they believed her because she was their mother, and she delivered it the way she delivered everything, with warmth, with concern, with the unshakable composure of a woman who has never been caught in a lie because she has never stopped performing long enough for anyone to look twice. If someone you love is slowly replacing you inside your own life, moving your people, rewriting your story, smiling, while they dismantle everything you built, you are not paranoid. You are paying attention. What was the first sign you ignored? Tell me in the comments. Because I can tell you the exact moment I should have seen it. I just wasn't looking. Year 8. The numbers finally spoke louder than Renee's explanations. My accountant, a quiet man named Gerald, who had done my book since year 4, called me into his office and closed the door. He had a printout in front of him, 11 pages. He showed me a pattern in the firm's project deposits. Over the previous 9 years, $340,000 had been routed through a shell LLC, registered under the name Salter. Salter was Renee's maiden name. The deposits were small enough individually to avoid triggering any automatic review. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 12,000 during a particularly busy quarter. But accumulated over 9 years, the total was $340,000 diverted from Hicks and Associates into an entity my wife controlled. Gerald looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Devin, this isn't an accounting error." I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes. The kitchen light was on. I could see Renee through the window, moving between the stove and the island, cooking dinner. She was making pot roast, my favorite. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary when I finally walked in, and she kissed my forehead and said, "You look tired, baby. Sit down." Her phone was on the counter. It was open to a text thread with Kyle about the Henderson account, the one I'd lost in year 3, the one she'd told me just moved on. She kissed my forehead, and her phone was open, and I stood in my own kitchen smelling rosemary, and understanding for the first time that the woman I loved had been robbing me for nearly a decade. Something changed that night. Not a decision. A structural shift. Something inside me that had always been flexible. Something that bent when she explained and bent, when she comforted and bent. When she rewrote the story, that thing became rigid. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I ate the pot roast. I complimented it. I watched her smile and felt absolutely nothing. And that absence of feeling was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced in 26 years of marriage. The next morning I arrived at the office at 6:15. Patrice was already there. Patrice Odom, our office manager. Renee had hired her 6 years earlier. I'd always assumed Patrice was Renee's person inside the firm. Eyes and ears. I wasn't wrong about that. What I was wrong about was whose side Patrice was on. She was standing by the copier with a manila folder when I walked in. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Hicks, I need to show you something. I need you to sit down first." She placed a flash drive on my desk. Then she sat across from me and told me a story that restructured every assumption I'd had about my own office. 14 months earlier, Patrice had been working late. Renee called Kyle from the conference room, not knowing Patrice was in the copy room next door. The call was on speaker. Patrice heard Renee say, "Devin still doesn't suspect anything. He's so focused on the engineering, he doesn't look at the money." Then she laughed. Then Kyle laughed. Then Renee said something about my cluelessness that Patrice wouldn't repeat to me directly. She just said, "It was the way she said it, Mr. Hicks. Like you were a joke they'd been telling each other for years." That phone call changed Patrice. She was a woman Renee had hired to monitor the firm, to keep tabs on workflow, to flag any irregularities before they reached me. But hearing her employer's wife laugh about the man whose name was on the building, hearing that casual contempt, something shifted in Patrice. the same way something had shifted in me in the kitchen. She spent the next 14 months copying every email, every forwarded client referral, every financial transfer, every voicemail. She built a digital archive with the quiet, methodical precision of someone who understood that evidence without organization is just noise. The flash drive she placed on my desk contained 1,847 emails. Every major client referral that had been rerouted to Kyle's firm over 9 years, each one with handwritten value ratings in Renee's shorthand. Patrice had mapped the entire operation. She'd done it without telling anyone. Not me, not Renee, not Kyle. 14 months of silent, meticulous documentation. When she finished explaining, I looked at the flash drive, and then I looked at her, and I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you built something real, and they were laughing at you for it." I want to stop here for a moment, because I need you to understand what it felt like to hold that flash drive. It was small, black plastic, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at Staples. It weighed almost nothing, but it contained the proof that my marriage, my family, my business, and my reputation had been systematically dismantled by the person who slept next to me every night. $340,000, 1,847 emails, 9 years, and a voicemail that I hadn't listened to yet. Patrice told me the voicemail was the last thing she'd captured, recorded 3 weeks earlier. She said I should listen to it alone. I put in my earbuds. I pressed play. And I heard my wife's voice, clear and casual and laughing slightly, say, "Devon's just the name on the building. You and I built this, Kyle. Once the boys are fully on your side, we won't even need him to sign the checks." I listened to it twice. The second time, my hands were shaking, not from sadness, from something colder than sadness. From the recognition that the woman who called my drafting pencil our lucky pencil had been planning to erase me from my own life, and the only reason she hadn't finished was that I found out 11 days before the Tacoma Engineering Association Gala. I called Margaret Yoon that afternoon. Margaret is a forensic accountant in Seattle. No warmth, no small talk. She has a reputation for being the person you hire when the numbers need to speak in court. I drove the flash drive to her office. She took it without expression. She said she'd need time. 6 hours later, she called me back. I sat in her office while she laid out the findings on a conference table, page by page. She removed her glasses, set them on the table, and looked at me with the flat calm of someone who has seen this pattern before. "Mr. Hicks," she said, "this is not a family disagreement. This is a textbook spousal fraud scheme with 1,847 documented touch points, $340,000 diverted through a shell entity, 9 years of sustained, deliberate extraction. This meets every statutory element for spousal fraud in Washington state." She paused. I said nothing for 11 seconds. I know it was 11 seconds because Margaret's office had an analog clock on the wall, and I watched the hand move. Then I said, "The Tacoma Engineering Association Gala is in 11 days. Renee is receiving the Community Builder Spouse Recognition Award." Margaret looked at me. She didn't smile, but something shifted behind her eyes. She said, "What are you planning, Mr. Hicks?" I said, "I'm planning to let 200 people hear what I just heard." The next 11 days were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I sat across from Renee at dinner. I answered my son's texts. I functioned inside a life that I now knew was a constructed lie. And I functioned perfectly because 28 years of structural engineering had taught me that the most dangerous moment in a demolition is not the explosion. It is the silence before the explosion, when every charge is set and every support has been calculated and the only thing left is the decision to press the button. Renee was particularly warm that week. She planned a surprise anniversary dinner. She cooked pot roast again, my favorite, the meal she'd been making since our first year. She lit candles She poured wine. She looked at me across the table and said, "I don't tell you enough how proud I am of you, Devin." Her eyes were soft. Her voice was the voice I fell in love with. And for one terrible moment, sitting in the candlelight with the smell of rosemary and the taste of good wine, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to put the flash drive in the garbage disposal and the voicemail in the delete folder and go back to the life where my wife loved me. And the revenue dips were the market's fault. And my sons just happened to prefer their uncle's firm. That moment lasted about 4 seconds. Then I remembered the sound of her laughter on that voicemail. Devin's just the name on the building. I smiled at her. I told her the pot roast was perfect. I meant neither of those things. Patrice and I worked every night that week. After Renee went to sleep, I drove to the office. Patrice had organized the evidence into categories. Client referrals by year. Financial diversions by amount. Email chains showing coordination between Renee and Kyle. The Shell LLC registration documents. And the voicemail, converted to a format that would play through the Gala's AV system. We printed a one-page forensic summary. Margaret Yoon's letterhead. The key numbers. $340,000, 1,847 touch points. 9 years. The names of every client whose account had been rerouted. 200 copies, one for every table at the Gala. Patrice looked at me as we loaded the copies into boxes. She said, "Are you sure about this?" I said, "She's accepting an award for being my partner while she's been stealing from me for 9 years. There's not a quieter way to do this that she hasn't already made impossible." 3 days before the Gala, I went to Kyle's office. I didn't plan to. I was driving past his building on my way to a job site, and I pulled in. His receptionist recognized me and waved me through. Kyle wasn't there, but his office door was open, and sitting on his desk, in a ceramic cup almost identical to mine, was my mechanical drafting pencil, the one from my first bridge, the one Renee had called our lucky pencil. I stood in Kyle's office doorway and stared at that pencil, and felt something collapse inside me that I hadn't known was still standing. She'd given him even the symbols, the thing that represented the beginning of everything I'd built, the rainstorm, and the blueprints, and, the 25-year-old kid with a dream and a pregnant wife who believed in him. She'd handed that to her brother like it was a party favor. I took the pencil. I put it in my jacket pocket. Kyle's receptionist asked if I wanted to leave a message. I said no. The morning of the Gala, I stood in my closet choosing a suit. Dark charcoal, white shirt, no tie. Renee was in the bathroom doing her hair. She was humming. She was happy. She was about to receive an award from 200 of my colleagues for being an exceptional partner to me. And she was humming while she curled her hair, and the flash drive was in my jacket pocket next to the drafting pencil. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older than 53. I looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was about to set it down in a room full of people. Renee came out of the bathroom and said I looked handsome. I said she looked beautiful. Both of those things might have been true. Neither of them mattered. The drive to the convention center took 22 minutes. Renee talked about the seating chart. She talked about which board members would be at which tables. She talked about her acceptance speech, how she wanted to thank me publicly, how she'd written something about partnership and long roads and the people who walk them with you. I kept both hands on the wheel and said the right things at the right moments and felt the flash drive pressing against my chest through the fabric of my jacket. The parking garage was cold. Our footsteps echoed. Renee took my arm as we walked toward the entrance. She squeezed it. She said, "Tonight is going to be a good night, Dev." I held the door for her. The ballroom was dressed in the association's colors. Blue and silver, round tables with white linen, centerpieces designed to look like miniature suspension bridges, which I found both flattering and unbearable. 200 people. Engineers, architects, contractors, municipal planners. People I'd worked with for decades. People who knew my name from bridge inspections and retaining wall assessments and the kind of steady, unglamorous work that holds cities together. They shook my hand. They congratulated Renee. They said things like, "You two are the real deal. And she's your secret weapon, and I don't know how you do it without her." Renee received every compliment like sunlight. She glowed. She touched people's arms when she talked to them. She remembered their cleanser nor she or sir was, in that room, the best version of the person everyone believed she was. I saw Craig Osterberg at a table near the back, my former partner of 19 years, the man who left citing direction differences. He was with his new business partners. He didn't look at me. He looked at his plate. I saw Henderson from Henderson Properties, the client who stopped returning my calls in year 3. He was at a table near the stage. He nodded at me. I nodded back. He didn't know yet that his name was on the list, that his account was one of the 1,847 touch points. He would know in about 90 minutes. I excused myself from our table during the appetizer course. Seared scallops on a bed of microgreens. Renee was deep in conversation with the association's vice president, laughing at something, her hand on his forearm, performing the role of supportive spouse with the ease of someone who has rehearsed it for 26 years. I walked to the back of the ballroom. The AV booth was a small curtained area near the service entrance. The technician was young. 24 maybe, headphones around his neck. I told him I had a special audio tribute from my wife that I wanted to play during her acceptance speech. "Surprise," I said. He smiled. He said, "That was really sweet." He showed me the auxiliary input. I did not plug in the flash drive yet. I thanked him. I went back to my table. Renee squeezed my hand under the tablecloth and whispered, "Where'd you go?" I said, "Bathroom." She said, "You're missing the scallops." I ate a scallop. It tasted like nothing. The dinner progressed. Salmon with a dill cream sauce that I watched people eat but could not taste myself. Speeches from the association president about infrastructure investment and community legacy. A Lifetime Achievement Award for a 70-year-old civil engineer named Tom Bradshaw, who had built half the highway overpasses in King County. Tom cried during his acceptance. His wife stood up and hugged him, and the room applauded. And I sat there watching a man be genuinely celebrated by a woman who genuinely loved him. And the contrast with what was about to happen at my table was so sharp I had to grip the edge of my chair to stay seated. The linen felt stiff and cold under my fingers. The chandelier above our table cast small refractions across the water glasses, and I watched those tiny rainbows move while Tom Bradshaw's wife wiped his tears with her thumb. And I thought about how the word partner can mean two completely different things, depending on who's saying it. They announced Renee's award at 8:47, the Community Builder Spouse Recognition Award. The MC read a paragraph about how behind every great engineer is a partner who holds the foundation together. Renee stood. The room applauded. She walked to the podium. Posture of someone who has imagined this walk before, rehearsed it in front of a bedroom mirror, chosen the right shoes for it. Her heels clicked against the stage floor in a rhythm that was almost musical. She set her clutch on the edge and adjusted the microphone and smiled at the room with the radiance of a woman who has never been told no by an audience. The stage lights caught the small diamonds in her earrings. The earrings I had bought her for our 20th anniversary. She began her speech. She talked about partnership. She talked about sacrifice. She talked about watching me work late and knowing the work mattered. She talked about our sons. She said, Brett and Landon were proof that love and engineering share the same principle. Build on solid ground and the structure holds. The room loved it. People were nodding. A woman at the table next to mine dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A man 2 tables over leaned to his wife and whispered something. Renee looked at me and said, "Devin, everything I am is because of what we built together." The room applauded again. I could feel the vibration of 200 pairs of hands clapping through the floor, through the legs of my chair, through the soles of my shoes. I had rehearsed this silence for 9 years without knowing it. I stood up. I did not rush. I buttoned my jacket. I felt the flash drive shift in the inside pocket, pressing against the mechanical pencil. I walked to the back of the ballroom at a pace that matched the fading applause. Each step was deliberate. I passed table after table and did not look at the faces. I looked at the carpet, dark blue with a silver geometric pattern. Hotel carpet, the kind designed to hide stains. Patrice was already at the service entrance. She'd arrived separately, sat in the back, waited. She was wearing a dark blazer and her reading glasses were pushed up on her head. She handed me the boxes of forensic summaries. Her hands were steady. Mine were not. I placed one stack by the AV booth. Then I walked to the auxiliary input, removed the flash drive from my pocket, and plugged it in. The connection made a small click that only I could hear. Renee was still at the podium. She was saying something about the future, about new projects, about how the best was yet to come. Her voice was warm and practiced and carried through the room like music. The AV technician looked at me. I held his gaze for 2 seconds. I nodded. He pressed play. The first sound was a phone ringing, a tinny digital ring that came through the ballroom speakers at a volume calibrated for speeches and award announcements. Then the click of a voicemail beginning. Then Renee's voice, relaxed, laughing slightly. The way she sounded when she was talking to someone she didn't need to perform for. The voice filled the ballroom through the same speakers that had just carried her acceptance speech. "Devin's just the name on the building. You and I built this, Kyle. Once the boys are fully on your side, we won't even need him to sign the checks." The room did not gasp. That's what people imagine. They imagine gasps. What actually happened was worse. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of attention, the biological silence of 200 people processing something that doesn't fit inside their existing understanding. It was the silence of recalculation, of every handshake and compliment, and you two are the real deal being re-examined in real time. I have stood on construction sites during controlled demolitions. I have heard the silence between the countdown and the detonation. This was that silence. It filled the ballroom the way water fills a container, pressing into every corner, against every wall, occupying every cubic inch of space between the chandeliers and the carpet. Silverware stopped moving. Glasses stopped being lifted. A waiter near the kitchen door stood motionless with a tray of dessert plates balanced on his palm. The air conditioning hummed overhead, and that mechanical hum was the only sound in a room that had held laughter 30 seconds earlier. I counted. 7 seconds of absolute silence. 7 seconds is not a long time. Unless you're standing in a ballroom watching 200 people realize that everything they just applauded was a lie. Then 7 seconds is geological. Renee's face went through stages. The first stage was confusion. Her mouth was still shaped around whatever word she'd been about to say, but the word never came. Her lips parted. Her eyebrows drew together. She tilted her head slightly to the left, the way she did when she was listening to something she didn't quite understand. And I recognized that gesture from 1,000 dinner conversations, from 1,000 moments when she pretended to be figuring something out while she was actually deciding how to respond. The second stage was recognition. She heard her own voice, and she knew. The blood left her face in a way I could see even from 30 feet away, even under the stage lights. Her skin went from warm to paper. Her fingers, which had been resting on the edge of the podium, curled inward until her knuckles were white against the dark wood. Her eyes found me at the back of the room, and in that instant, every layer of composure, every year of practiced warmth, every performance she had ever delivered in front of these people, all of it cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Like a load-bearing wall that has taken one stress too many. I could see the fracture line run through her posture, through her smile, through the careful architecture of the woman she had built for this room to see. The third stage was panic. Her eyes went to Kyle's table. Table 9, near the center of the room. Kyle was already moving. His napkin was still on his lap when he pushed his chair back so hard it hit the person behind him. A woman at his table flinched. Kyle stood and his water glass tipped and rolled across the white linen, spilling in a slow arc that nobody reached for. He walked toward the exit with the rigid posture of a man trying not to run. His shoes were loud on the ballroom floor. Each step echoed in the silence. He did not make it to the door before people started turning to watch him leave. Heads swiveled, one after another, like dominoes. Kyle reached the double doors at the back of the ballroom and pushed through them without looking back, and the doors swung shut behind him with a sound that was unreasonably soft for the weight of what it meant. The fourth stage was something I had never seen on Renee's face in 26 years. It was the face of a person who has been seen, not the version she constructed, not the warm, supportive, community-building partner, the real one, the one who mocked her husband's cluelessness on speakerphone, the one who gave away his lucky pencil, the one who stole $340,000 and 1,847 client relationships, and then stood at a podium and said everything I am is because of what we built together. Her chin dropped. Her shoulders, which had been set in the exact posture of a woman accepting an honor, caved forward. The crystal plaque was still in her hand, but she held it loosely now, the way you hold something you've forgotten you're carrying. I walked toward the front of the room. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. Patrice was behind me, placing the one-page forensic summaries at the end of each table row. I could hear the soft sound of paper being set down, then picked up, then the smaller sound of breath being drawn in as eyes found the numbers. People picked them up. I could see their eyes moving across the page. Margaret Yoon's letterhead, the numbers, the names. The room filled with the sound of turning paper, that dry whisper of 200 sheets being read at once. Henderson Properties was at table 6, and I watched Bill Henderson pick up the summary and read his own company's name on the list of diverted accounts. His jaw tightened. The muscles along the side of his face stood out like cables. He set the paper down slowly, aligned it with the edge of the table the way you handle a document that will be needed later, and looked at Renee and did not look away. His wife put her hand on his arm. He did not acknowledge it. Craig Osterberg was at table 14. He did not pick up the summary. He already knew what was on it. He stared at his plate with the fixed concentration of a man trying to become invisible. The remnants of his salmon sat in congealed sauce. His water glass was empty. His hands were flat on the tablecloth, fingers spread as if he needed the surface to hold him in place. His new business partners were reading the document. One of them, a woman in a navy suit, looked at Craig. She looked at him the way you look at a structural report that has just come back with a failing grade. Craig did not look back. A muscle in his neck moved. Nothing else. A woman named Diane Foss, who sat on the association's ethics board, was the first person to speak. She stood up from her chair slowly, holding the summary in both hands. The paper trembled slightly. She was 62 years old and had been in engineering longer than most people in that room. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the silence with the clarity of someone accustomed to being heard in rooms full of men. Devin. How long did you know? I said. 11 days. She looked at the summary again, She looked at Renee. Then she sat back down. She folded the paper once and placed it in her purse. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. Then Margaret Yoon stood. She was at a table near the back. She had come as my guest. She was wearing a gray blazer and no jewelry, and she stood with the economy of someone who treats public speaking the same way she treats spreadsheets. Precise, unburdened by performance. She said, "My name is Margaret Yoon. I'm a forensic accountant. I reviewed the evidence Mr. Hicks has presented tonight. The financial diversion documented on the summary in front of you spans 9 years, totals $340,000, and involves 1,847 individual touch points. This meets every statutory element for spousal fraud under Washington state law." She paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds. She let the room absorb the word fraud from someone whose profession is defining it. Then she sat down. She picked up her water glass and took a sip. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 200 engineers understand what evidence looks like. They work in a profession where numbers either hold up or they don't. Margaret's numbers held up the way a bridge holds up, the way a retaining wall holds up, with the keter, fee, quiet, authority of something that has been tested and does not bend. Renee was still at the podium. She had not moved. The crystal plaque was still in her hand, but her grip had loosened so much, I thought she might drop it. Her mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. She said, "Devin, this is..." And then she stopped. The unfinished sentence hung in the air above the ballroom like smoke. She looked at the room. The room looked back. 200 faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some with the careful blankness of people who are already thinking about what this means for their own accounts, their own referrals, their own relationships with Kyle's firm. And in that exchange of gazes, in the absolute silence of a ballroom that had been full of laughter and applause, 4 minutes earlier, the mask was gone, not removed, dissolved. There was nothing left to perform because there was no audience left to perform for. Every person in that room had the summary. Every person had heard the voicemail. The social architecture that had protected Renee for 9 years, the warmth, the charm, the hand on the forearm, the children's names remembered. All of it was visible now as what it was. Infrastructure. Engineered. Load-bearing walls designed to support a lie. And like any structure built on a compromised foundation, once the first element failed, the rest followed. Not slowly, not gracefully, all at once. I walked to the podium. I did not touch her. I did not speak to her. I could smell her perfume. The same perfume she had worn on our wedding day. Chanel No. 5. I picked up the crystal plaque from the podium where she'd set it down, and I read the engraving. Community builder. The letters were etched deep into the glass. I ran my thumb across them. Then I set it back down. I turned it face down on the wood. The sound it made was small, a soft click of glass against polished oak. Then I walked out of the ballroom. I did not look at Renee. I did not look at the room. I looked at the exit sign above the double doors, green and glowing, and I walked toward it. Patrice was in the parking garage. She was leaning against her car, a silver Honda Accord with a dent in the rear quarter panel that she'd never gotten fixed. She looked tired. She looked relieved. The fluorescent lights in the garage cast everything in a flat, yellow-white glow that made the concrete walls look older than they were. She said, "It's done," I said. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome, Mr. Hicks." I got in my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. The leather was cold. I could see my breath in the air. The parking garage smelled like motor oil and damp concrete, the way parking garages always smell in Tacoma in October. I did not start the engine. I could hear faintly the sound of the ballroom doors opening and closing as people left. The sound carried through the concrete structure the way sound travels through any rigid medium. Dampened, but persistent. I could hear voices, not shouting. Low, urgent, confused voices. The sound of 200 people trying to reconcile the evening they'd expected with the one they'd received. A car started somewhere on the level below me. Then another. The garage began to empty. I sat there until the voices faded, and the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and my own breathing. Within 72 hours, the cascade was complete. Kyle lost 11 of his 14 clients. They recognized their own names on the forensic summary. They recognized their own accounts in the list of diverted referrals. They called Kyle's office and got voicemail. They called again and got voicemail again. By Tuesday morning, his receptionist, the same woman who had waved me through 3 days before the gala, stopped answering the phone entirely. Bill Henderson called me personally on Monday at 9:15 in the morning. He said, "Devin, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." His voice was different than I remembered, quieter, stripped of the professional ease that had always characterized our conversations. I said, "Neither did I, Bill. Neither did I." There was a pause on the line. 8 seconds. Then he said, "I'd like to come back." I said, "Call the office. We'll set up a meeting." Kyle's remaining 3 clients were projects too far along to transfer. He would finish them. He would not get new ones. Within 6 weeks, Kyle Salter's firm went from 14 active accounts to 3 outstanding obligations and an empty calendar. Renee was asked to resign from the United Way Board. The request came in writing, on letterhead, within 48 hours of the gala. She had served on that board for 7 years. She had chaired the annual fundraiser twice. She had organized silent auctions and volunteer drives, and had her photo taken with the mayor at 3 separate events. The board cited a need to maintain the integrity of their volunteer leadership. That's institutional language, for we cannot be associated with you anymore. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. It thanked her for her service. It wished her well. It was the kind of letter that says everything in what it doesn't say. Craig Osterberg's new firm faced a Washington state licensing inquiry. The forensic summary had documented his awareness of the diversion scheme. Emails in which he had been CC'd on client transfers that went to Kyle's firm instead of back to mine. 2 of his new partners withdrew within a week. The third stayed, but renegotiated his equity share downward. Craig called me once, 4 days after the gala. It was a Thursday evening. I was at my desk. The office was empty. I could hear the traffic on South Tacoma Way through the window, the low hiss of tires on wet pavement. Craig's voice was hoarse. He said, "Dev, I wanted to tell you." I said, "You had 19 years to tell me, Craig." I hung up. The phone sat on my desk, and I looked at it, and I thought about the Wednesday night 6 years earlier when Renee had poured the Pinot Noir and rubbed my shoulders and told me Craig had always been looking for an exit. She was right about one thing. He had been looking for an exit, just not the kind she described. He'd been looking for an exit from the guilt of watching it happen and saying nothing. Renee tried to control the narrative. She called board members. She called mutual friends. She called my sister. She called the association president's wife. She called 7 people in the first 36 hours. She told a version of events where I had ambushed her, where the evidence was exaggerated, where she was the victim of a vengeful husband and a disloyal office manager. It didn't work. It didn't work. Because 200 people had heard her voice on that voicemail, and 200 people had Margaret Yoon's forensic summary in their hands, and the numbers didn't lie, and the voice was undeniably hers. You can rewrite a story when the evidence is ambiguous. You can't rewrite a story when 200 witnesses heard the same recording at the same time. The narrative she tried to build collapsed before it could stand, the way a structure collapses when it has no foundation. She had spent 9 years building stories for an audience of 1. She was not equipped to counter a story told to an audience of 200 with documentation. Brett called 5 days after the gala, my eldest son, 27 years old, working at Kyle's firm. The firm built on my stolen clients. It was a Sunday, late afternoon. The light in my office was turning amber through the west-facing windows. I could see dust motes floating in the slanted light when his name appeared on my phone. He was crying. His breath came in the jagged, broken rhythm of a grown man who doesn't know how to cry because he hasn't done it in years. He said, "Dad, I didn't know. She told me you wanted out. She told me you were burned out and that Kyle was helping keep things going. I didn't know." I sat in my office and listened to my son cry, and I wanted to feel vindication, and instead I felt grief. Not for Renee, for Brett, for Landon, for the years they spent inside a story their mother had written, believing they were helping their father by stepping back when they were actually participating in his erasure. Brett was 22 when he chose Kyle's firm over mine. He made that choice based on information his mother gave him. He was a kid trusting his parent. That's not a crime. That's what children are supposed to do. I told Brett it wasn't his fault. I meant it. The lie was never his. He was just raised inside it. Landon called the next day. He said less. His voice was flat and careful, the voice of a 23-year-old who is trying very hard to hold something together. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "Come to Thanksgiving this year." He said, "Okay." Then he was quiet for a long time, and I listened to him breathe, and neither of us said anything. And that silence was the most honest conversation I'd had with either of my sons in years. Patrice resigned from the firm 2 weeks after the gala. She came into my office on a Friday morning. She was wearing the same dark blazer she'd worn at the gala. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair she'd sat in when she first placed the flash drive in front of me, and she said her work was done. I asked her to stay. She shook her head. She said she needed a fresh start somewhere that didn't smell like 9 years of someone else's scheme. I understood. The office held memories for her too. 14 months of copying documents late at night. 14 months of watching Renee walk through the front door and smile at her, and knowing what that smile concealed. Before she left, she put a card on my desk. Plain white envelope. No name on the outside. Inside, it said, "The building has your name on it because you earned it." I put the card in the top drawer of my desk. It's still there. The drawer smells faintly of cedar from a sachet that Patrice had placed in it years ago. Every time I open it, I think of her. The mechanical pencil sits in the ceramic cup on my desk. I retrieved it from Kyle's office the week before the gala. It's back where it started. It's just a pencil. Graphite and metal, and a mechanism that still works after 28 years. The eraser is worn down to a nub. The clip on the side is slightly bent from being dropped once, years ago, on the concrete floor of the Lakewood Bridge construction site. But it's the only thing I wanted back from any of them. Not the money, not the clients, not the years, just the pencil. Because the pencil was from before the scheme, before the Shell LLC, before the voicemail and the flash drive and the silence in the ballroom. The pencil was from the morning a 25-year-old kid and his pregnant wife drove through a rainstorm to deliver their first set of blueprints. That version of Renee existed once. I know she did. I was there. I held the umbrella. 3 weeks after the gala, 5 a.m. I'm sitting in my truck outside the office. Engine off. Window cracked 2 inches. The air is cold and tastes like the sound, like brine and wet timber and distance. The building is dark. My name is on the glass, lit by a single security light, and I read it like I'm reading it for the first time. Hicks and Associates. The letters are clean. Someone from the cleaning crew must have wiped the glass recently because there are no water spots, no dust, just the name in white sans serif against the dark window. For 28 years, that name meant something I built. Then for 9 years, it meant something being stolen from me. Now, it means something I kept. Not because I fought for it with lawyers or leverage. Because an office manager heard my wife laugh at me on a speakerphone call and decided that was enough. Because a forensic accountant laid out 11 pages of evidence with no emotion and absolute precision. Because a mechanical pencil survived 28 years of use and still wrote a clean line. The sky is turning gray. First light in Tacoma in October comes slow, through marine layer and fog, and the building emerges out of the dark the way buildings always emerge in this city. Reluctantly, like they're not sure they want to be seen yet. I can smell the salt air from the harbor. I can feel the cold through the truck window where the glass meets the rubber seal. A seagull crosses the parking lot in a low arc and lands on the curb near the entrance. It stands there, facing east, waiting for the same light I'm waiting for. I miss Renee. Not the Renee who stole from me. Not the Renee who turned my sons against me. Not the Renee who laughed about my cluelessness with her brother. I miss the Renee who carried blueprints in the rain. That woman disappeared years before I noticed. And grieving her is not the same as wanting her back. It's just the honest recognition that the person you loved and the person who betrayed you can be the same body and completely different people. The loss is not the marriage. The loss is the version of reality you lived in when you thought it was real. That's what breaks, and that's what eventually lets the light in. Because when the false story ends, the real one can start, even at 53, even alone in a truck at 5 a.m, even with the taste of betrayal still metallic in the back of your throat. The real story starts when you stop performing for someone else's audience. The light is coming up over the roofline now. The glass on the building catches it. My name appears letter by letter as the sun finds the angle. I used to think loyalty meant staying, no matter what. I was wrong. Loyalty without truth is just patience for your own destruction. The difference between being loved and being used is that love doesn't need an audience. And the moment you speak the truth that someone else has been hiding, you don't just free yourself. You free every person in the room who felt something was wrong, but didn't have the words for it. If you're sitting inside someone else's version of your life right now, if the story being told about you doesn't match the one you're living, I want you to know something. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be heard by the right room at the right time. That story's been told. One mechanical pencil that traveled from a desk to a lie and back again. One flash drive that weighed almost nothing and carried everything. And one voicemail that 200 people will never forget. If you've ever held proof of something no one believed, or if you've ever sat across from someone you loved and realized they were performing, I'd like to hear your story. Leave it in the comments. And if this is the first time you found this channel,